All righty. Well, thanks everyone for coming today. Welcome to our talk on user behavior analytics, marrying the SOC and identity like peanut butter and jelly. So I'm Matt Topper, president of Uber Ether. With me is Matt Volo, solutions catalyst, and one of our chief architects within our ICAM practice. So let's have a little bit of a talk. So over the last 2-3 years, many of our organizations have finally found a consistent home for identity. And that's seemingly, at least on the commercial side of the world, within the CISO shop. And we're peers with our friends in the SOC now, but a lot of organizations we talk to really aren't working with them closely. And when you start peeling back the onion, we're all trying to solve the same threat problems. And we both have data that makes each other smarter and makes it easier for us to actually detect and prevent a lot of these hacks that are going on. So in general, things that we know go together. Peanut butter and jelly, Batman and Robin, pizza and beer. I will point out that is real pizza. That is Detroit style. And if I'm in town with you ever, I will treat you to it to teach you what it tastes like. And identity and security. Actually, probably not. And I'll let you pick which side's the security side and which side's the identity side. I'm not here to make enemies because this is all about reaching across the aisle and becoming friends with the people in the SOC. But I'll be honest, it depends on the day. We're both of those pictures in the identity world. So, right, we've got all of this business data of how people's relationships are with our organizations. We give people access, but after that, it falls apart. We don't know if they actually ever use it. We don't know if what they're doing with it is risky or not. That's all stored inside of the SIM in the SOC. And we don't see that back on our side until we get a phone call that says, hey, we need to lock down this account. Or, hey, that account got disabled through a random PowerShell script that we actually don't know where it came from. And it's our buddies in the SOC who wrote Python, Ruby, PowerShell to actually start mitigating these threats. But, right, it should be integrated with the tools that we have in identity and not a one-off, so we know where it's coming from and it's auditing. And at the end of the day, all of us are trying to do zero trust. And we've got human identities, we've got devices, we've got apps, we've got infrastructure, we've got network, we've got data. I think in identity, we're pretty good at human identities at this point. We're pretty good at that app side. That other stuff, some of it we do in privileged access management. Probably not the best, right? A lot of us just have Band-Aids to close some audit findings and not truly fully governing it. But the underlying data, the actual infrastructure to the network devices, the VPN devices, as we're defining software-defined networks, it's a stretch for a lot of us. And then we've got problems like this, right? Simple, easy picture provided by NIST is what a zero trust architecture should look like. We've got a policy decision point, and administrators come in and write fancy policies in natural language that makes it so simple to deploy. And it just pulls in all of this data from all these different sources, whether that's your identity systems, outside threat intelligence, activity logs, SIM data. Oh, wait, that's literally hundreds of gigabytes, if not terabytes of data in all of our large organizations daily. And we're just going to grab it in real time with our policy decision points and make these decisions. It's great. You know, we'll just wait 20 seconds for every web page to come back while we assemble this. So I've actually pushed back on NIST and ruffled a little feathers, as I tend to do, and said, you need to bring back that idea of a policy information point, right? And really find a way to aggregate this data in something that does this natively, right? Whether it's a traditional data warehouse, or we'll call it a data lake, or an AI machine learning, but we need to build that ahead of time. And we can't just dive into it, or we'll never get to this complex picture, which is what Microsoft calls zero trust identity. Bring all of the users, their risk, all of the devices, their risk through a conditional access plane. And then that goes back to everything on the back end. Oh, that's an easy picture to put in front of our C-level executives and say, yeah, we got this covered, right? We need to work together with the people that can help us enable this, that have been dealing with the networks and the devices for, I don't know, 30, 40 years. They might have some experience that us that focus on the human side of the world don't. So, needless to say, we've got some issues.
So let's talk about some of those issues. So let's look at our SOC first, as the first team will investigate. What is their responsibility? It's really managing the security of the enterprise network, but they're continuously falling behind. They have 40 new CVEs every single day. Breach time is reducing. So what's the response from the enterprise? Let's spend some more money on security, buy more tools for the security team, and the problem will get better. But we're seeing that security is decreasing over time, not increasing. In addition to all of those tools that we're buying, we're also buying new SaaS applications for our end users. Both of these tools being brought into the enterprise are resulting in more logs for the SIEM to process, and those logs need to be stored, they need to be processed. That's licensing fees for our SIEM processing. All of that money that's being pushed into our security team is being spent on these tools, not on adding more analysts to the SOC. Then the SOC analysts themselves are processing these events in the SIEM. 50% of them are leading nowhere. They're dead ends, blinking lights on a dashboard. They spend all this time investigating it. They don't close any incidents. They're not actually solving any security problems. They're just spending time. So we have these expensive, scarce resources that aren't providing any business value. Sound familiar to us identity professionals? If we look at the identity teams, what is their responsibility? We're the front end responsible party for access into our corporate network. As Sarah said yesterday, we're the boundary. Identity is everything. And so how are we protecting our network from compromised users? We're doing that with authentication assurance, MFA. But what we heard from Microsoft yesterday is that during the SolarWinds attack, after it, 45% of their organizations that were affected have enabled MFA. So under half of their organizations went through the process of that free MFA that they gave to them and actually enabled it. Across their entire Azure suite, only 18% of them have MFA enabled. So adoption of MFA is not what we would expect as the identity teams that are pushing MFA upon our user bases. Then with COVID, we've added this new access plane to our enterprises. We were forced to spin up remote SaaS applications to enable our remote workforce to access corporate networks that they weren't accessing before. Provisioning of access, new SaaS applications. Do you think the identity team built those with automation? No, all that automation was put on the back burner. We'll get to it later for these temporary access points. Then when it's finally time to turn back to upgrading those, we don't have any automation tools to do it. So those identity expensive engineers, we're doing patching, maintenance, small deployments. We're not actually providing any business context or business value to the organization. So how do we solve this? At Uber Ether, we've started using user entity analytics to bring some of the information between the teams, enhance some of the capabilities of the teams, and make it so that that time that they are spending on the problems is actually a little bit more beneficial to the organization. So before we go into the architecture of how we bring the information across it, I think it's important we give a little bit of a high level of what UABA, how it works, what it provides, what it connects to, how it gets its data in it, before we jump into the architecture of the identity and SIEM tools. So user entity UEBA. It is going to connect directly to the SIEM data sources. We're not going to go out and create agents on all of our applications to aggregate the logs. We're going to use that investment we've already made in the SIEM and just pull the data directly from the SIEM into the UEBA tool. We're going to do some ML AI processing on that data. We're going to flip the data. So instead of looking at it at a per server level access, we're going to make it identity centric. So we're going to provide timeline views of what everything that a user has done with that access that's been provisioned by the identity team. Then once it's been turned into that timeline view, we can start to analyze a historical behavior of what users are doing with that access, and then create incidents for the SOC analyst to look at, see that timeline view, and make decisions based on the aggregate of what a user did during that session versus triggering a specific threshold event, which is what they're doing today. In addition, the UABA platform also provides some watch list on the dashboard that says, once we've elevated a user's risk, they get put into these categories. Maybe this is the last session risk of users, and if it's elevated, it'll be on the top of this list. Maybe it's the highest risk event that has been done. Maybe it's one specific event that's extreme that's really jumped them up to the top. So we can have these watch lists that kind of direct the analyst to look at specific users versus waiting for those incidents to get created. So how does this actually work? A little bit more into the behavior analytics piece of this and how we're actually building that behavior. So once we aggregate that data in, the first part that we need is when to start looking at a user and when to stop looking at a user. Usually that's done with VPN connections, SSO logins. Once you log in, that starts the session. Once you disconnect, timeout, log out, a period of time elapses, that ends the session. Everything that you do with your access in the middle is that timeline. So if you log into a terminal, that starts some activity. Maybe you become root, SSH into another box. If you're a SIM analyst, you're looking at 3 logs already. In the UEBA tool, we're just looking at one identity, a timeline of 3 events. So we're just changing the perspective immediately. But once we have all of these events that occur, it collapses into a session. And then over a period of time, we have all of these sessions for a particular user. And using that historical data that we pulled in from the SIM, we have an expectation of what the user is doing with that access. Additionally, we can see maybe there was some event that we brought in that we actually missed an incident once we just use that aggregate data that we already have invested in. But so once we have that close, start, and end, that's the behavior. Once you have a list of those behaviors, that establishes the profile for the user. So if you log in at every single day at 7 a.m., when you log in the next day at 7 a.m., it's not as anomalous. It's seen this before. It's not as risky. By the 3rd, 4th day, the risk is not sufficient to actually drive up any risk. But on Friday, if you log in at 9 a.m., it's never seen this before. That's a little bit risky. To us, that seems like you just came in late. But to the ML processing, this is something it's never seen before. So it's going to push your risk up. Probably insignificant. It's not going to create an incident, but it starts to make the SOC aware of we're seeing a little bit of a different behavior in our users. What if on Sunday you log in at 2 a.m.? It's never seen this before. This is extreme. What the UABA tool is thinking is, let's look back a week. Has he logged into Sunday before? Let's look back a month, a quarter. Is this something that the user is periodically doing to determine, is this a production outage that they're investigating on a Sunday night? Or is this a threat actor that's logging at 2 when no one's looking and hoping to exfil some data? What if we see some bandwidth increase in that period of time, 3x the bandwidth? That seems significant. Are they uploading a patch? Are they pulling data out? These are all the things the UABA process is looking at. And then there's one additional piece that the SIM tool has no exposure into, and that is the peers. So the UEBA product can look at the peers, see what they're doing. Maybe they're all logged in at 2 a.m. This looks a lot more like a production outage that they're all working on versus a cohort of malicious actors. Definitely would be a problem if we cut their access in the middle of this downtime.
So, right, it starts to bring in a lot of that context that both our identity teams and our SOC teams are completely blind to today. And as Matt said, one of the benefits is when you set this up, it's pulling off of your existing SIM data in history. So it's not one of these tools that you install and go, hopefully we find something in 3 months. We got to wait and collect data, right? It's based off of your real history. And then it also is pulling from, sorry, I had to throw it in. Right, it's pulling, it also has a ton of cloud connectors to pull directly from the SaaS applications that a lot of the SOC is still blind to today, right? And they're using the native APIs to call from that and then load the data into the user behavior and analytics and just adds the stitch through the thread for the day. So at the end of the day, user behavior analytics from an identity perspective is really good at 3 things for us, right? Detecting compromised activity. So that can be, hey, somebody failed a password attempt 5 times. They hit it on the 6th time because we block a log out failed events at 8, or we block 3 failed for 20 minutes and they're just patient and wait, right? Attackers, all they got is time, right? All they got is they just write code. They figure out what your problem is and go, all right, they blocked me for 20 minutes. I put a wait statement in. I'll come back in 21, right? And just let it run because their job is to hit as many things as they can and find one that pops, right? One VPN account from a guy that we fired last quarter and didn't turn off. Wait, did somebody say pipelines? Right? But you can see those 5 failed login attempts. They hit a good one, immediately go to a knowledge-based access, add a new MFA key because they passed it KBA, and now they're in our network. But then they start hitting apps that they don't normally hit, or they hit the same apps, but start hitting more, right? We're completely blind to that in identity today. Like as soon as we get past that front authentication event door, to be honest, we're throwing a SAML connection and OIDC token over to the apps, and the apps have the logs locally. We've purposely gotten rid of the WAM devices because they're a pain in the butt to manage, right? and they're a pain in the butt to keep patching upgrades. And like Matt said, we don't have time. So I know I'm on a tangent at the moment, and you're going to punch me to keep us on track. But right, gives us that visibility for compromised activity. It also is really good at malicious activity, which I don't know if anyone's tried to hunt malicious activity. It's hard. It is not, right, Andre said on stage for the opening, needles and haystacks. This is freaking needles and needle stacks. Like, and you're looking for one that's got the multi-micrometer hole difference to put the thread through, right? That is what a lot of malicious activity is, because you've got one bad actor that might have trust in your organization for a long amount of time. And we all know there's one file in your organization that if it got out the door, or if you've got layoffs coming and you're going to miss your quarter number, that gets out 2 weeks early, companies can die. But that one file isn't really going to blip anyone. So malicious will actually start looking at, okay, they clone Git repositories. They don't clone 10. That's weird. Or, hey, that person sudoed into an account, SSH'd over to this other box. From there, fired up a local RDP, X-tunneled it all the way back, got onto a Windows machine from that went their account root, straight administrator account, and cleared a log, right? That's how good these guys are. But actually, you'll see that and see, oh, those log files that we're watching got truncated out of nowhere. Risk is through the roof. And follow that all the way back to the user. Say in a SOC, that's like hours to find that data. So really good at malicious activity. And then the other one that's hard for us in identity is distributed activity, right? We all know right now, we are seeing, you go to LinkedIn, you search for all the employees of the company, first name, last name, @company.com. And we're just going to go to the VPN server and say, summer 2021, ! Hit them all. Someone's going to pop, right? Let's be honest. Most of our organizations, well, here at Identiverse, we tend to have some of the more advanced. We've probably blocklisted the seasons at this point. We've blocklisted the company names for going into passwords, but a lot of orgs don't. Or, so then they find one that pops. A user behavior analytics tool will say, hey, we see all these failed logins from one IP or these 20 IPs, right? Where as an identity analyst, we're like, oh, it's a failed login. Someone fat-fingered it, right? But they'll see that and then be able to generate a block list that we can then use across all of our interfaces. So they might be trying to attack the VPN, but now we've got a block list of all those IPs that we can use on the enterprise access control side, that we can use on the network access side, right? So we can share that data across all of our identity tools. So, all right, 30 minutes, I will speed. So I wanted to spend a little bit of time talking about how SOC analysts are trained today and how they're being brought up in the world in sadly the dark, right? They're being taught how to aggregate these data sources and execute actions on their own. And I'm going to challenge everyone to go back on Monday, because we all know we're flying back tomorrow. Friday's going to be a burn day, but go back on Monday and walk into the SOC and go, those are some sweet dashboards. Tell me about it, right? Tell me what you do. How can we help? Because they're being taught all of these data sources. Look down that list. Can we find one that doesn't have an identity component? Over half of that list are things that we're directly managing and provisioning to, right? Now they've got detection rules, which that's what they're really good at. And that's what SOC analysts geek out about, right? The same way we geek out about an LDAP schema, right? At a token format, and the token's encrypted now, and now we've got backend with CAEP, right? That's what we geek about. They geek about detection rules and how to work with those rules. But we look at this, they're looking at stuff, and they've got rules that say, hey, this is a user with abnormal activity on our domain controller. Hey, this is someone that's showing sudo rights on a Linux box. I know as identity professionals, we have all of our privileged access management ticked and tied, being run through our centralized identity governance platform, deeply integrated with our PAM tools. There's no way anyone can ever add local access, or no way they can actually modify the safes because we're great. But they have an ability to detect privileged access and tag that user as a privileged user. I think that might be useful to us. I mean, maybe we already know that's a privileged user. Sweet. At least we know now that they're detecting that activity and it matches up. But if I could query an API and just say, hey, once a day, tell me who all the people you think have privileged accounts are across our organization. Take that back to my IGA tool and do a diff on a daily basis. That just got really freaking powerful. Pretty simple, right? So then we start digging in. I just took 4 different use cases that they teach analysts as they're growing up. I've crossed 40 and I feel like I'm the old guy now. And I know that's not the old guy, but like I call people kids now and I get in trouble. But anyways, I'll shut up. Let's look at the left and look at the right on all of these slides. Through that list, everything on the left and the right, which is where they start their analysis from, and the actions they take to finish that, 100% identity related. Every single thing on everything they're taught. And the nice thing about their tools and some of the user behavior analytics tools, because we are pulling these threads together and you can watch the user all the way through, these detection rules pop up based on what they're looking at from the data sources. And then MITRE has, I think it's about 200 techniques as part of the MITRE attack framework. And actually just yesterday, MITRE and the NSA released the new defend framework, which is an extension to the attack. So the attack side is, hey, we have a threat that's happening. Defend is, how do we better defend from those attacks? So something to watch out for, brand new, literally yesterday. I caught it on my feed this morning. But, right, then they aggregate those in investigation tools that are, a lot of times, are a bunch of Python scripts or PowerShell scripts, right? That's mostly what I see when I talk to SOC analysts. And then they have response actions. But today, their response actions are, hey, Matt, I got something here. Call the help desk and turn it off. So instead of you continuing to look for threats, you're going to be annoyed calling the help desk and asking for that AD account to be turned off for the next half hour while I'm pulling 50 log files together and hoping we can figure it out. Wouldn't it just be easier that, hey, this crossed a threshold, either automatically execute an action through our IGA tool that says, hey, disable AD right now. Don't delete them, just disable them. Disable their VPN. Call over to their access control, like ping, and say, boop, kill all their active browser sessions. Oh, wait, we have the interfaces to do that. We could actually make this work. Right? That's the right way to do this. So privileged activity, right? Data sources, response actions. That's us. Account manipulation, right? People trying to sudo into things they don't have. People trying to get access to directory services. Hey, who's those guys, right? And add memberships to groups, right? They've got all the techniques to investigate it. Again, response actions, block accounts, restrict accounts, remove roles, remove entitlements. Yeah, they're writing one-off PowerShell scripts, embedding usernames and passwords to connect to them, not using good secret management to do it, breaking every 30 days because they forgot to do their password rotations. Oh, wait, that's the same stuff we have every day. Evasion techniques, right? Again, audit tampering, we don't see that in identity, but we sure can do something about it when it happens. And data exfiltration. We'll show at the end of this how this all gets stitched together, show a data exfil. But, right, same thing. So at the end of the day, the user behavior tools focus really on these things that you look at it, and these are the top threats we are trying to solve in identity. They're already smart on how to detect them, how to mitigate them, or how to triage them, and then how to mitigate them. Why are we reinventing the wheel in identity today? We're all trying to build this ourselves. Same way they're trying to build the backend connectors, and they're trying to build the actions to do the work. And we've paid that pain. right? We know what a nightmare managing all of an IGA connectors are, right? We know where the dirty user data is. We know when somebody's 45 days away from an expiring contract. Sure, it'd be nice to tell them, right? Give them some of those tips that when they get to the malicious part and they start threat hunting, they understand that business context of how the user's relationship is with the organization. So they can go, huh, this is an SVP. He reports to the C guy in finance. I don't want to piss him off. We're not going to disable that guy's account, but we're going to watch it close, right? Or if it's one of us, right, they're going to turn us off immediately, right? But they're able to see those things and play those games more smartly now, right? Because I know a lot of SOC analysts, and right, I joke like, I'm dancing around, but like I joke, you're not an identity governance professional until you've accidentally disabled 10,000 accounts overnight with bad code. Same way, you're not a SOC professional until you've turned off a VP's account and been called into the CIO's office, right? That's your welcome to the world. You've graduated, right? But they're all gun shy because they don't want to be that guy. Well, let's give them the ability to see that and define it.
So as Matt said, we have this context data in our ICAM stack. We have the security operations center over on the right. We have the data that they need to give them that context. And we saw how just bringing up a UEBA product can benefit the SIEM. But how do we start to bring that data across the two different teams to empower both of us? So before we go into the architecture of how we've been solving this problem, I want to introduce one more persona. So I know we've already talked about the SOCs and the identity analysts, but what I want to focus on now is the managers. And the managers are a key part of this because they're a part of this process that doesn't appear in the data. They approve the access, they certify the access, but they are the only ones that know, should this person have this access and why? You're not going to find an attribute on the user that tells you any of that information. It's just in the manager's responsibilities to make sure that their subordinates have the access they need to perform their jobs. Back to those certifications, those managers are completely overwhelmed with certification fatigue. They might have 20 subordinates that each have 20 entitlements. That certification comes around, it's 40 checkboxes worth of access to look at. Maybe your identity team is great and brought that down to 20 roles per person, but that's still a ton of access to approve. So what do? Select all, bulk approve, save, certify, send it off. CISO sees 100% certification complete.
Audit pass!
Yeah.
Woo!
Yeah.
Value added.
Exactly. So once we get down to the architecture, this is kind of what we're seeing at most organizations. We're seeing our ICAM stack on the left. It's based on identities from authoritative source, like an HR system. We have all of our different identity products that are connecting to, provisioning access to, providing user access to these applications. And then, like Andre said, the data and identity wants to flow, but in this case, it flows away from us like a river into the SIEM that we never see again. So all of that log data, all the access usage is not visible to us. There's this air gap between us that we need to bridge. So how we've been solving it is by introducing UEBA to our organizations. We connect it directly to the SIM, as I had said before, pull in all that data, provide the visibility to the SOC analysts. They start getting benefits of that timeline view into the data, the watch lists that tell them which users they should be tracking. And the net result of this is they can start providing those SOP docs to start tailoring them to very specific use cases instead of those thresholds being passed on specific events on specific servers. Then, in order to make the UEBA tool even smarter, we start taking that IGA business context data and passing it as attributes directly into the UEBA product. So we start giving them things like, who are my peers? Who's my manager? What's my executive level status? Am I a privileged user? Am I on a contract that's expiring soon? What's my offboarding date? Once we provide all that information, the ML processing can use those attributes to start making better decisions about risk, but we can also expose that data to the SIEM analysts to give them that information when they're investigating the incident to say, oh, this is an executive. I need to follow the executive specific SOP document so I don't cut off their access without being 100% sure. Then this also provides those watch lists. So those watch lists that we saw on the dashboard before that were very focused on risk now start being very focused on business context. here's the risk score of all of the users that are on expiring contracts. These are the users that I'm really worried about exfil because they want to take that code that they've been writing and bring it to their next contract. So now that we've made the SIM team look really well, it's time for us to start benefiting from the UABA product.
So we gave them 2 wins, right? Now we're friends,
Yeah.
right? Now they owe us a little bit. So we're bringing it back.
Right, so before this, we have no visibility into the access that we've been provisioning, right? But the UABA tool in the timeline view has that access timeline, so we can start to see how users are using that access that's been provisioned. So those managers I talked about before that have those 400 certifications, we now know which users are using the access they've been provisioned, which ones aren't using the access, maybe we should remove it. Which users are using that access in a manner in which seems within the scope of bounds that would be acceptable, and which ones are using it kind of to the edge or past those bounds. Then when we get to the certification, the ones that aren't using it, let's just remove it. Why do we even need to present that to the manager? It's access that's not being used. Let's take it away, least privilege. The ones that are using it within the scope, let's just recommend that they approve it so they don't need to look at it. They can still override our selection, of course, but then the users that are really at that threshold of the outside of the bounds of normal, we can give them a link back to the UABA product. They can look at the timeline, see how those users are actually using it, make more informed decisions. And now they're really only focusing on maybe 2 of their users and maybe 3 of the access to those users instead of 400 of the access before. Brings a lot of value to those certifications instead of just a compliance checkbox that we're meeting at the end of the quarter.
And when you show the auditors this data, they get it, right? And they understand thresholds, and you explain to them that, hey, we're actually giving people actionable results based on real statistical data. They geek out too, and these things get approved, right? We always think auditors are going to push back. You need to look at everyone with a magnifying glass, print out Excel reports, right? Once you start saying, hey, this is how we're doing it, and the mathematics of it, right? Because a lot of them are math geeks at the end of the day. And they go, no, this makes a ton of sense. And this actually, I understand how this makes us better now as an organization, or makes you better as an organization, and I'll be willing to sign off on it. Do you have a question?
Just a thing, right? Because thinking with recommendation when it comes to recertification is always something, right? Because
Yeah.
sometimes because we are recommending that they do something, or we are recommending that they do something, it's not the manager or the reviewer is actually making the decision. Isn't that a sticking point? Because I mean, I understand what you're saying, they might understand it, but since it's us who's recommending a decision on behalf of the manager, how does it play out in the long run when it comes to audit and compliance?
Yeah, so the question we have to repeat because the people streaming can't get it. No, I'm just saying why I'm going to try and repeat back to you is, right, as we're bringing this data in and making recommendations as identity professionals, right, we're pre-delegating, pre-approving for the managers. And then how's that getting back to the auditors, and if the auditors are taking it? And is that the scope?
Yeah, that's the scope.
Okay.
Because one of the things I always have when it comes to, I mean, the industry having been autonomous identity, let's say.
Yeah.
Right. So, but just curious about how it pans out in the actual compliance space.
Yeah, so what we've seen is that ability to say, we know how this is being used, right? And just sitting down and saying before, it's literally a checklist. And all they're really figuring out is, are they still employed or not? Because no one ever takes away access. And auditors understand that, right? Like, I used to joke, the way you pass an audit is you bring a stack of paper in and put it on a scale. And if it weighs more than a certain amount, you get your checkbox, right? When we all started growing up, going through Sarbanes-Oxley, that was literally it. Like, if you brought a big enough stack of paper that confused the heck out of them, they'd give you the checkbox. So now you say, hey, we've been blind to this. You know, people are just blindly pushing approve. You can see our audit reports that are showing 97, 98, 99.9% the same. Because a manager's not stupid, right? They'll always find 1 or 2 that they're going to futz with to show they didn't just blanket approve, right? And it's probably because they forgot to turn that user off or contractor off when they left 2 months ago, right? So we say, hey, we know based on actual usage now, because here's how that data comes in. We can say, we'll take this away, which would have never happened before. And then we know based on behaviors that these are your power users or these are your malicious users. It's not at a scale that our SOC should have dug it, but that manager should know. And you just lay it out for them like that, and they go, it makes 100% sense. And they will normally say, for the next 2 quarters, we're going to run it both ways. And you got to go find your pilot managers and say, I need you to dive on the grenade for me for 6 months. Right? And we all do it. Just like I'm saying, we build these relationships with the SOC. We all have those groups outside of the IT team, because the IT teams are the worst people for following our own rules. Right? We've got those outside groups that we've built those partnerships with over years and say, hey, this is what we're trying to do. We've already passed it with the auditors, but they've asked for your organization, and right, they've asked for your organization, even though we told them that's the organization we're going to do this for us. And in the future, if this passes after the next 2 quarters, this is, your workload used to be a day to go through your certs. We think we can get it down to 20 minutes and actually raise the security of the organization. It's everyone wins. And the auditors walk away happy. And then they start bragging to their buddies about the cool stuff that is going on within your organization. And let's hope it changes, right? Really how they look at audits moving forward, because I don't know, we all hate this part of the identity job. Let's do it a smarter way. So
yeah, I think that would resonate with an auditor, because it's you know, if you use an analogy of financial transaction and you say, right now we're giving the entire ledger of accounts to a manager and expecting him to flip through it, and I just somehow identify weird stuff. Like, you would never do that as a financial auditor, right? Of course not, right? So if we've got tools that can help you key in and review riskier seeming, right, transactions, then you're really focusing on what's important. And I think, you know, that's exactly, it's the same thing. And I think they'll really, yeah.
So as Rob had said, right, you use a financial, like open up the ledger and say, hey, which vendors don't we use anymore? Or which vendors are out of line? People just flip through that and go, oh, that's like 100x. That's definitely wrong. But the ones that are 3x, so
actually have a role review, and we only review out of role entitlements, right? So things that are not pre-approved per se, so that those are the only ones that are presented. But since in this case we're actually recommending, because all of these are actually as these entitlements, but as an identity team, we are actually recommending that they approve something or deny something. I was just curious how that time.
Yeah. So.
But it's a longer
And
conversation, I think.
Yeah, honestly, let's all go grab lunch afterwards and geek the hell out. Because you can tell we're having done this a couple times with customers in the last 18 months. It truly changes the way their organizations are working together and solves a lot of problems really quick. So yeah, let's go grab some lunch and dig in some more. But I will say right, autonomous identity is, right, whether, pick your vendor, right? They all have now their AI ML tools, but I will say all, because I haven't seen anyone, they say they can do it, but I haven't seen anyone take it that far. Nobody pulls that SIM data in yet. They just pull in the data that has been given. Nobody has an ability from the identity vendor side that I've seen to say, and this is how it's being used or not. And that's where the auditors get comfortable, because it's based on reality of actions that are being taken, which is what they're worried about. They truly don't care if you've given them the access. They care about what they're doing with it. And we can't give them that today. So that's, I think, where this has been successful with organizations, where some of that autonomous identity has fallen aside. And that autonomous identity plays into this, right? I have a box called intelligence. That, right? Call it autonomous identity, autonomous intelligence, identity intelligence, identity analytics. It's that category, but that ability to pull the real data in of what's being used changes it. All right, lunch, because we're gonna get kicked out in 15.
Okay, so far we've just brought the context from the product from UEBA into identity. We actually haven't started taking any actions yet, so that's where we're gonna go next. And this is where we start. So before we were bringing that contextual data in, about what access is being used. But now we're going to bring in the UEBA behavior data to utilize the risks that is coming out of the product and drive actions through our identity product. So here, this would be, we see a risk elevate, go into our identity product, immediately off of that risk elevation, and cut that network access. So cut AD, cut the VPN, cut all the network access as the incident is open. Right there on the spot, we're not waiting for a phone call to run this deprovision or suspension. We're not utilizing the tools that the SOC analyst wrote. We're using those identity products that are already managing the apps that provision that access initially into those applications. Now the SOC analyst sees that incident, goes through their process, makes their conclusion. If it is a non-threat, they unsuspend that account. They undo what the identity team has done to that account. The user is fine. But if it was a threat, great. We've already suspended most of their access. Their front door access is closed. Yes, they still have an open session, but we have a solution for that as well. We're going to reach out to the access management system, out to the PAM solutions, cut those open sessions. Next time they hit a web app, a protected anything, they're going to be redirected to authentication with a closed account. They're not getting any more data out of here. One last thing that I kind of want to go through is one of the architectures that we're starting to see at some of our other clients, and that is that instead of bringing the UEBA data directly into our governance application, we're bringing it into the directory services. And for the governance application, this is no different. We still are pulling the same data, still doing the same actions off of both behavior and the access usage. But the nice thing about centralizing it in the directory services is that's where our access management system is traditionally connected, and the directory services application is really good at translating the data. So if we bring in risk scores from UEBA and make a set of code in the directory services application that says anyone that's above this threshold, let's call it 50, represent them as a member of this LDAP group. Now, if we go into our access management system, write a policy that says, hey, everyone that's in this LDAP group, step them up to MFA authentication. This becomes dynamic authentication assurance simply by using UEBA end-to-end.
So, no, perfect. And along those lines, as we talked about earlier, right, we're seeing customers do both because some of that data needs to be more real time. And we know a lot of our identity governance tools that we use today are still based on cron jobs, right? They're schedulers, they're freaking cron jobs at the end of the day. And yes, they've given us APIs to shove that data in, but that also provides some delay with some of the virtual directory tools, right? We're able to say, hey, this group, refresh once a day. It's not as critical. This watch list, not as critical. This one, more critical. Do once an hour. The company-wide block list of malicious IPs you've identified that's coming from our external threat intelligence sources, from the attacks we're seeing on all our edge endpoints, that's good. We want that real time, right? Like as soon as we have an IP address that we've identified as malicious from the outside, we want that on an LDAP group list that all of these tools can read from. And on an authentication event, say, hey, it's not on the block list, let it through. So the other piece that we could spend another hour on is this also works for non-humans too. Not only is it people and the devices they're using to access your networks and services, it also starts handling the service-to-service account problems. Because the attackers have got smart, right? They're not trying to escalate our individual privileges when they find a privileged user. Because what they're doing is they go, I have found a privileged user. He has access to a server that has an OAuth token. A username and password. Oh, wait, they're kind of the same thing with a key and a secret. They're just really long. But once you get access to the config file on the OS, I can use that anywhere. And guess what? Those tokens, they're a lot more rich than using the user token. I can get a lot more data when I've got a service account. And I know they don't watch those. Nobody watches service accounts as close as a human account. But same way, we now know, hey, this box, these clusters of boxes, they're now becoming peer groups just like human peer groups. And they always connect to these clusters of boxes. Wow, what are we looking at? A microservices architecture in our standard Kubernetes deployments now, right? Or even our traditional data centers. But guess what? When that starts getting used to go to another box, that's weird. That's risk for that service account within those clusters. We see that. It behaves the exact same way. They call it an entity, they call it a non-person entity, but we can do the same stuff. So the investments we're making for humans will continue to pay dividends for all the different accounts in our organizations. And at the end of the day, we get a pretty picture like this. And you can walk in for any SOC analyst, and if we walk through this list, hey, that person came in at 4:36 in the morning. They badged in, right? We get that off of our badging system. By the way, our identity team has aggregated the HR data and has told us that this user has given their notice. So they're an HR risk. This is real. This isn't us mocking up screens. This is from real customer stuff. They logged in their workstation 5 minutes later. Surprise, they walked to their desk. It's 4 o'clock in the morning. They show up between 7 and 9, right? Or 10 o'clock when they've got their doctor's appointment. We know that pattern. They've been here for 3 years. Then they start remote accessing 3 things, stuff they normally do, right? There's no context to that risk on the right side. They went, opened up their email client. They opened up, access the servers to check, to make sure things are up, right? Because they don't want to be in the middle of pulling something out and get that phone call that, hey, we need you to troubleshoot something, right? They want to, if they're going to start pulling bad stuff, know that their day is going to be clear, right? Then at 5 in the morning, we start seeing them do Git pulls to repositories they've never accessed before, right? So now, within 2 hours, we've stepped up a risk score, and an analyst sees that appear on a watch list because we've crossed the threshold. You can see it build over time on the right-hand side. They pull this up, they know exactly what that user is doing and can immediately take action, right? Whether that's a phone call to HR, call security, show up at their desk, right? Walk into the back of their cube, like, hey, what you doing, right? We've all been there. Those are, I don't know, I like those witch hunts, right? It's kind of fun to be like, yes, we got one. But when you use your traditional SIM tool, they'll never catch this because they're looking at, oh, I've got logs coming from the badge reader system. People badge in all day long, right? 4 o'clock might be when we switch all of our guards out. I'm not going to know that Gary, in this case, isn't one of the guards, right? People log in all the time. We've got a 24/7 knock SOC. I don't know that he's not part of that group and he's part of the software engineering group. It's just a log on a box. But now that we can stitch this together, add that business context we have in identity, it changes everything. So I'm going to blow through this. Luckily, there's a lot smarter people that gave an awesome virtual presentation on the Continuous Access Evaluation Profile yesterday. So a tool from Google and Tim from Microsoft gave a great presentation. They're leading the standards body for CAEP today. But the one part that I hope people in the audience are going, hey, there's still a hole in this problem. This sounds great, but there's still a hole, right? All of our SaaS providers. We're making an OIDC connection. We're making a SAML connection. They're taking that assertion and going, great, they're good. Throw it on the floor. We're going to start an app session. That person's in the app for the day, right? They're in Salesforce for the day. We might have been lucky enough to say, hey, every 4 hours, every 8 hours, 24 hours, they have to reauth. But we know from all of us using mobile apps, those token lives are getting longer and longer and longer, right? Because if I tell you got to relog into your corporate app every day, you won't use it. You go, F this, it's too much of a pain in the butt, especially with pains in the butts like us that are also making them step up down MFA every time, right? So CAEP is giving us that ability to start having a conversation directly between our enterprise IDPs and the resources that we're subscribing to. So Microsoft, Google, Thales, SailPoint, I mean, the big guys have already said, we know this is a problem, we need to work on it. This is already available in Microsoft CAE, Continuous Access Evaluation. Google has said they are working on it and have previews out. SailPoint has open sourced a set of Java libraries to implement this. So if you want to start baking it into your tools, you can. But as I said, Atul and Tim, awesome presentation yesterday. We're very fortunate to have it on repeat. And if you really want to dig in, it comes out of the Shared Signals and Events Working Group. And this is a profile off of that. And that is an OpenID group that they have a mailing list. You can get daily updates, weekly updates. Or if you really want to dig in, you can join the biweekly calls and start contributing. But real fast, today, what we do for most of our apps in enterprises is the left side of this picture, right? We authenticate, we get a token, we give it, and then they drop it and create a session token for their app. There is nothing to tell those applications, hey, this person's credentials changed. Hey, we revoked their sessions at headquarters, right? There's no way to put policies on Salesforce that we push down. Just doesn't exist. So you might have a user that comes into the office perfectly fine, logs in to Salesforce, and if they're in the office, they might get access to more data versus when they're out, a salesperson is out on the road. Well, they can shut their laptop, walk down the street to Starbucks, open it back up, that same session's open. And the session was initiated when they were in the office. So now they're looking at that data outside. And Salesforce is just like, whatever, we got a session, give it to them, right? But we can actually set a policy that says, hey, on source IP address change, force them to reauth. And from an enterprise perspective, push that down on our vendors. Similarly to how we've pushed SCIM out to our vendors to do the provisioning side. Same way, they can tell us, hey, their source IP address changed. Now we can take that data and alert the other resource providers that they've physically moved. Those, we might not need them to reauth, but it's good data for them to have, right? So today, the profile supports session revokes, token claims changes, credential changes, right? Middle of app usage, you might get more attributes, you might get roles, you might get entitlements to get you more stuff. How many help desk calls do we get that I got the access, I said I got it, but I don't see it in the app? Well, you got to log on, log back in. That's money, time wasted for all of our orgs, and users hopefully get it now. Most don't, right? But that gives us an ability to say, hey, Salesforce, hey, Box, they're in this new group. They've got these new attributes. Apply it on your side. And they just see it, right? Just stupid little things that make life easier for our users, which hopefully makes our lives easier and lets us work on harder, fun problems. And then there's sister emerging standards that are coming out of this. Overall, if you want to look at SSE, that's the Bitbucket framework. There is I call it Sibling Profile, because I don't know if we're like sister profiles, called risk events that are also being defined. So CAEP events are expected to be quite frequent, right? They're just normal user lifecycle changes that we're alerting out on. Risk events are, hey, account credentials have changed. Hey, they're doing a recovery activation, which might be perfectly fine, but we're going to tell all of the SaaS apps that this is going on, which is a high-risk event. It could be perfectly fine. It could be an account takeover. We don't know yet, but we're going to give you a tip that these are accounts you might want to look at closely, because we're going to come to you if it goes out of your system and blame you. We're here to help, right? Sessions revoked, recoveries, opt-ins, opt-outs, right? As we do GDPR stuff, if people decide to opt out, we now have a way to push that down to all of our relying parties. And then similarly for service-to-service interactions, there are profiles being developed for OAuth tokens, right? So now we can work on some of the machine-to-machine type stuff. So as I expected, we blew over time by 5 minutes, but thank you for hanging with us. Like I said, go back Monday, go into the SOC, go into your NOC, get interested in their blinking lights. Walk around, make friends. Bringing these teams together will be the biggest value for our organizations because none of us can keep up. There's too much moving in too many directions for both of our teams. And we have too much good information to help each other to try and solve it on our own. And there's no reason they should be writing PowerShell scripts to do the things that we're already connecting. There's no reason they should take the 5 minutes to rotate the username and password every 30, 60, 90 days and then break something. Or when they do have an attack, they forgot to do it and that thing fires and now they're debugging that, right? Leave it to us. That's what we do. We'll give you an API, call it. And then we'll also work with you to figure out what that means because we've got those connectors. And when those things change on the business side, we'll change them for you, right? That's the stuff that we can do. And because this is all based on open standards, web services, right? We've said the virtual directory stuff that all of our LDAP tools can talk to very easily and natively. It's a quick win. Like we're seeing customers make through that full life cycle of pulling the data in, identifying the accounts, and bringing the data back into IGA to start using it in like 60 to 90 days. Like if you could go back to your CIO and CISO and say, hey, we can get visibility into the attacks and stitch together all of the user threads and start using it within 90 days, or hell, by the end of this calendar year, they'll let you play. They'll let you go do it. And when you make it happen, because it was, I'll be honest, it was scary how quickly we were able to bring this together for some of the vendors we work with here. And like, once we started working through it, they all saw the value and everybody's eyes light up and it just fixes a ton of problems. So we're not going to slow down on attacks. We're not going to slow down on applications we're integrating. They're not going to slow down getting new CVs every day. We just got to be there to help each other and give each other the tools to make each other more successful. So we'll just end with, right, reveal behaviors across your organization, accelerate the accountability, bring that back to the managers to look at the events that aren't big enough for us to raise up to the SOC, but are big enough to say, hey, this is weird. And then hold them accountable to certify that access when it happens, right? This becomes your zero trust baseline, right? All of this stuff, when we talk identity for zero trust, is what we claim we're gonna get to. And if we can say we can build that baseline in 90 days, guess who they look at to keep solving the next set of problems? Right? They come back to our teams. And magically, we start getting the funding we need to be successful because we've proven it to them before. Right? We've all been on IGA projects, PAM projects, access projects that we buy it. We spend 6 months integrating it together, have shown no value, and the execs are like, what do we spend this money on? And then you buy the next product in the stack, and it takes 12 months to bring it all together before you can use it. Right? We need to build our trust back with them. And this is a very good, easy way to do it and show them how we can deliver time to value quickly. So with that, thank you. We build these things, we do these things, we love these things. If you have the problems, we just want to talk about them with you because the more we understand the challenges, the better we'll all get at it. I'm personally tired of solving the same problems in the identity profession for the last 20 years. Let's get past it and work on the cool shit. So with that, thanks everyone.
Thank you.